Hello and welcome to all of the above. I'm James Brown. Thanks for joining me. You can check out my work at jamesbrowntv.substack.com or just about anywhere online at jamesbrowntv. Help me grow this program by liking, sharing, and subscribing. One of my favorite things in the world, and one I intend to do a lot on this program, is speaking with people who do unique things for work, like Jeff Tyzik. He's a fellow Rochester, New York resident who's long been known as one of the most innovative composers in the world. The list of his accomplishments is long. He's a Grammy winner. He's released nearly 30 records. He's appeared with more than 50 orchestras all around the world. He joins me now to discuss his path, his career, music, and whatever else is on his mind. Jeff Tyzik, welcome to the program.
Hey, James, great to be here with you. Thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
No problem. Where are you?
Well, actually, right now I'm in Rochester. I just came back from Toronto. I was conducting a Motown show in Toronto with these incredible artists, Chester Gregory, who was he was Berry Gordy in Motown the musical, Shayna Steele, who's worked with Chris Bodie, and she toured the world with Bette Midler as a background vocalist, but she's a phenomenal jazz vocalist on her own. And also Michael Lynch, who was American Idol, Big Mike, season 9, Big Mike. So we just did that concert in Toronto on Tuesday and Wednesday, and we're actually doing it in Rochester next week, so I'm home for that. Phenomenal concert, just great music, and they're incredible artists. So yeah, I've been moving around a lot. I was in Italy a couple of weeks ago, and then I've been conducting in Oregon in different cities. So it's been kind of a crazy spring, but I'm happy with it.
It's a crazy spring. Is this a typical stretch for you?
Yeah, it is. I do about maybe 18 to 20 weeks of conducting a year. I have a position with the Detroit Symphony, so I go there 3 weeks a year. Dallas, I do 4 weeks a year, and including Vail, Colorado. We go out there for a music festival every year at the end of June. I also do the Oregon Symphony. I go there 3 weeks a year. And then I do the Rochester Philharmonic here for about 6 or 7 weeks, depending on the season. And then in the middle of that, I also guest conduct. I mean, I conducted the Cleveland Orchestra in the past year, and, a bunch of other orchestras around the country as well. So mostly those 4 orchestras, but other ones that come up that interest me.
You're in your 70s, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm 71.
Yet you're on the road 18 weeks a year.
Yeah.
Do you plan on slowing down anytime soon?
Yeah. I'm in what the musicians call a diminuendo, which means you're doing a kind of a slow, decrease in tempo and volume. Yeah, no, I am. Not as much as maybe I'd like, but it kind of has a life of its own. Because the funny thing about the orchestra world is you make your commitment 18 months to 2 years in advance. So when you say, oh, I want to slow down, well, you've already committed 2 years out, so you've got to wait till the next year to sort of taper off the year from that. And but yeah, I am doing a lot of writing, producing, composing, arranging type things, creating a lot of concert material. And I love being with an orchestra on stage. It's an incredible artistic and emotional experience for both audience, musicians, and me. But I'm not fond of hotels and airports and all that kind of stuff. A few years ago, at that point, I had 2 million miles banked on United, 500,000 on American, and I don't know how many on Delta, And it's like, wow, I have all these miles, and I don't really want to go anywhere because I'm always going somewhere, And I think I had at one point, I had like 1 million Marriott points and, all that stuff. It's crazy.
Wow. I at your height of your travel schedule, how often did you go out of town?
Well, before the pandemic, I had 2 years where I was only home 10 days a month for a 7 or 8 month period. So I was really booking it back then, you know. Then the pandemic hit, and actually, you know, a lot of orchestras closed down during the pandemic because there was going to be nobody in the theater. You couldn't have people. That was all over the country. But orchestras decided they needed to stay relevant, and they wanted to do something. So within the guidelines of social distancing, and which affected how many people could be on stage, orchestras got into streaming. So they were trying to still reach their subscriber base by saying, hey, you can now watch us on Friday night live. We're going to be doing a live concert. And we were limited to the number of players we could have on stage because of, you know, social distancing rules. So I actually had to write a ton of music for small orchestra because not a lot of music exists for that. So I'll never forget. So anyway, before I get to that, you know, during the pandemic, I was traveling, and my wife and my manager both said, you're out of your mind, because this is before testing, before vaccines. So, you know, I was masking up and gloving up and all the stuff that we find out later really didn't make a difference anyway. And I was flying, and I was going to Detroit and Dallas and places, and we were doing these streaming concerts. So we were playing in a theater, a 2,000-seat theater, to nobody except cameras, and there was no music. So I created a couple of concerts. One was a ragtime concert, and it was music of Scott Joplin, Jelly Roll Morton, W.C. Handy, you know, all this kind of early jazz, which was kind of written for small orchestras anyway. You know, that's kind of was the nature of the music. So I put a concert together with that was very successful. And then the Detroit Symphony wanted to have this group, Troupe Vertigo, which is a cirque group, come and perform for streaming. And they do all these classical masterworks, like, you know, Dvorak symphonic dances and you know, all these different pieces that are for full orchestra. So I had to take those pieces, which are written for full orchestra, and condense them so that they could be played by 24 people and still sound real, still sound right. Which, I mean, it took hundreds of hours. And so I ended up writing a lot of music during that time period. So we would do these concerts, you know, we'd play this big piece would finish, dead silence. Nobody in the hall, you know? And then you turn around and there's a camera out there, and I'd have to talk to the camera. And so then they started letting in a 2,000-seat hall, 50 people. So, and they would sit, you know, like 40 feet apart, like all over the hall. And I'll tell you one thing, 50 people, when they're clapping, can make a hell of a racket in a 2,000-seat room, you know? So then we'd play, and there would be 50 people, and we would be still streaming. And I'll never forget that Buffalo asked me if I would come and help them out, because the conductor that they normally used was quarantined and couldn't come. So I went there and did a few weeks. But one of them, some of the restrictions had lifted, and we actually had 250 people in the audience. And the orchestra people were crying, because people were back in the room. I mean, we had, you know, this kinetic energy that happens between the listener and the musicians. It hadn't been there for months and months. And all of a sudden there were people, and it was like, it was unbelievable, the emotion on stage. So that was a pretty crazy time period. So anyway, since the pandemic, you know, after that, I've cut back a bit. But before the pandemic, it's a long answer to a short question. I'm sorry, but yeah, I was out there that one year, man. I came home and I'd unpack, and like 5 days later, I'm gone again, you know. And then sometimes I'd be gone for 2 or 3 weeks at a time. So I'm a little over that, to be honest with you. You know?
Yeah, I gotcha. I have a couple of different questions about your long answer there. I'm wondering, you've played in front of it's a 2,000-seat auditorium you were in. I'm assuming you've played in larger places. How do you compare being in a packed crowd, in front of a packed crowd, a sparsely filled crowd versus no one? What's the sensation in all three environments?
Well, when you're playing for no one, you're totally focused on the musicians in front of you, and you're concentrating on doing what we need to do together to make this music come alive. And it can be, you're not distracted by anything else. You're not distracted by any person, by any visual that's going on. It's like you're in a recording studio and you're totally focused on the music. So you can create really great music that way, and the musicians communicate with each other as they do. In a full house, there's a new element. If you imagine, here's the orchestra, and here is the audience, and here is the conductor. I'm in the middle between the orchestra and the audience. And the energy that flows between the orchestra and the audience is just unbelievable, because even if people are not, in a pop concert, if somebody plays a jazz solo, people are going to applaud during the piece, that kind of a thing. But if we're playing some big classical piece, people are going to applaud at the end, not take part. But you can still feel the energy in the room of the listeners. If you are tweaking the listeners, you can feel their emotion, their energy, even if they're not applauding or yelling or something, So that experience takes it to a whole new level, because humans are, we're putting out this ethereal thing called sound, and that is touching the spirit and the soul of the people in the room, and there is an energy coming back, and I'm standing right in the middle of it. So that is electric. When it's a sparse house, I think there is a tendency when musicians walk out on stage, at first, they're like, oh, it's a small crowd tonight, for about 2 minutes. And then everybody is like, you know what? It doesn't matter if there's one person out there. We're going to play our hearts out for that one person, and then you kind of get to that place where you might think initially you might feel, well, there's not going to be as much energy in the room, but it's kind of a hybrid sort of between the huge crowd and the nobody, and then you work the energy. The energy is still palpable in that group of people. And sometimes a smaller crowd is even more effusive than a large crowd. It's hard to pick on it. So to me, look, to walk on stage is a privilege. It always has been. To get to walk into a room and create sound and touch the human spirit of whoever's in the room is a privilege to get to do that. So to me, it's always a special experience, but there are these elements that make them each unique.
You also mentioned scaling down compositions.
Yeah.
Can you walk me through that? How do you do that?
Well, if you have a piece where it's written for, 2 flutes, 2 oboes, 2 clarinets, 2 bassoons, 4 French horns, 3 trumpets, 3 trombones, and tuba. So that is, 8, that's about 18 wind players plus strings, and then all the other things that happen. So I would have to take the music written for 18 wind players and get it down to 10. And that means I have to do very creative things with the chords, which notes to leave in, which notes to leave out. Sometimes there are 4 French horn parts, and I only have 2 horn players and 2 trumpet players. I'll have the trumpet players play flugelhorn, which is a more mellow instrument. It sounds a little bit like a French horn. So if it's just a French horn passage with 4 notes, then I'll make the 2 trumpets play flugelhorn and mix it in with the French horns, and it gives the impression that it's still the same sound. But you can't start at the top and go, okay, I'm just going to give all the 3 and 4 horn parts to trumpet 1 and 2. You can't do that because they don't always play together, and there's different things that happen. So you have to figure out how to put the essential parts in and still keep the character of the piece while you are starting to condense the number of players. So it's kind of a complicated process. With the strings, it's really not that complicated because there are only 4 string parts, even though there are 12 first violins. They're all playing the same part. So basically, you can just say, okay, well, instead of 28 strings, we're only going to use 12. So you're going to have smaller numbers, but all the parts are going to be there. But when you take two flutes and say, well, now it's only going to be one. Two oboes, well, now it's only going to be one. And two clarinets, and there are two bassoons, there's going to be one. So you've taken 8 down to 5. And then instead of 4 French horns, 3 trumpets, 3 trombones, and tuba, so that's 11, you're going to take that down to 5 as well. Now there's a lot of choices you have to make and make changes in what they are playing. I'm not rewriting the music, but I am reorchestrating the music. So that it's a very lengthy process. And if you're doing a piece that is something everybody knows, like Dance Macabre, which is the big violin solo they always play at Halloween, the Saint-Saëns Dance Macabre. I mean, if you're going to take that piece and condense it, it better be right. Everybody knows that piece in the world. So I would say I felt I really needed. It was funny because the Detroit Symphony said we booked Troupe Vertigo, and I said, "Okay, it's a pandemic. What are you going to play?" Well, we're going to play this classical music, and I said, "How are you going to do that?" There's 39 different parts. You can only have 18 people on stage. How are you going to do it? Well, we have these kind of bad arrangements, and when I hear that, you're going to put the Detroit Symphony on stage with bad arrangements, not going to happen. So that's when I said to myself, I think I could figure a very artistic way to reduce this music, to give the impression of the full symphonic music, to make sure all the essential parts are there, but condense it down. So I went on this quest, and I spent months doing it. I went into the first rehearsal with this small ensemble in Detroit, and I'm going, oh my God, these players, I mean, they've played Dance Macabre 90 times in the right version. And they're all in there, and everybody is sort of shell-shocked from the pandemic anyway. And I'm thinking, boy, I don't know, this is going to be interesting how this goes. And we started to play the music, and I saw the musicians smiling, and they were like, wow, we can do this, and this actually sounds good. So it was a journey, and the musicians ended up really appreciating it. And now since then, what's happened is there are a lot of orchestras that do concerts where they can't take the full orchestra. Like maybe imagine in Rochester, this place is, there's Highland Park, which is this big place in Rochester where it's a beautiful park. And I think it was designed by Olmsted, the same guy who did Central Park in New York. And there's a little stage in there in Highland Park. In the Highland Park Bowl, there's this little stage. And sometimes the orchestra will go there and play, and they only can put 20 people on stage. And there's never music for that. Well, guess what? Now there is. So a lot of small orchestras are buying this music for summer concerts or these special events that they do when they can't field the full orchestra. So there is a life for that music beyond the pandemic. So it's turned into a good thing.
Your description sounds the equivalent of a musical optical illusion. Is that an appropriate term?
Yeah, I would say it's a musical audio illusion. Yes.
Very interesting. And as you were describing it, another thing popped into my head. You're working with well-known music a lot, but you also done a lot of your own compositions.
True.
When you're obviously with your own composition, you can adapt it as you see fit. I would imagine that there are more limits with something that's well known.
It's funny that you say that because on the Troupe Vertigo concert, the music director the artistic director of Troupe Vertigo really likes actually some of my original compositions, and one of the ones they were doing was something. It's called 3 Latin Dances, and it's a beautiful piece. It has 3 dances in it. It has the Cuban danzón, which is a romantic dance. It has the cha-cha, which is a Cuban dance, and it has the malambo, which is an Argentinian dance, which is a very exciting piece. And I wrote it for a huge orchestra. And when we were going to do the concert in Detroit, she said, "Well, I want to do your 3 Latin dances." And I said to her, and I thought about it, I said, I don't know if I can condense that piece. There's so many things in it. I don't know if I could really make that piece come alive. She said, you'll figure it out. So of all the music I did for that concert, that was the hardest. My own piece was the hardest one to actually condense, just because of how massive I had made it. It gets pretty big at the end. It's a huge piece. So, yeah, I don't know. I just look at music. If I'm going to do anything, like reduce something, or if like this company Shermer has come to me over the years with Duke Ellington music, and Ellington didn't write a lot for orchestra. He wrote a few pieces for orchestra, which are pretty good, but most of his stuff is written for his big band. And they've said, well, we want you to orchestrate these pieces. We want you to make them work for symphony orchestra. I always feel like if I'm going to do an Ellington Strayhorn piece, like Duke is on one shoulder and Billy's on the other shoulder, and they're watching me work on their music, and they're saying, "Oh, don't do that. No, that's too much Tyzik. Just do that. Yeah, that's Ellington." So I always feel like the composer. I imagine they're in the room with me, saying, "Well, that's what I would have done." And so I try to think of it from their perspective. Like somebody comes to Saint-Saëns and says, "Look, I'll give you £10,000 if you will perform Danse Macabre for the King in London, but we only have 18 players. What are you going to do?" So then I think, okay, there's the project. How can I make this work? So it's always, some things probably can't be reduced, but there are examples, for instance, where there are many composers who have reduced their own music. So we know it's possible. So I just try to do it using all of the education, skill, and things that I've learned over the years of working with orchestras in a way that is as creative, but as good as it possibly can be to satisfy the listener who has heard the original so many times, to make it as real as it can be. So it takes a lot of time to do that, and a lot of care and thought, and tearing apart a chord. Like, what are the essential notes here? Well, this note is doubled in 3 places. Well, we only need one person to do that to give the impression. It's all this. It's kind of this technical musical stuff, but it's pretty deep. Actually, it's not easy.
Just thinking about the process you're laying out there, the only way I can relate to it really is, like, I've worked as a journalist, and I've been out covering the same story as someone else. And I know that when I write about the same thing that someone else is going to write about it, my lens is different. Therefore, my imprint and my shape, how I shape the same concept, would be different. How do you know when to pull back on the Tyzik? Is it always a conversation with Billy and Duke, or whoever created it before?
No, it's occasionally there. Like, for instance, if I do a Duke Ellington collection of maybe 6 or 7 different pieces, there are times when I know I'm writing this for a symphony orchestra to play, and it's not going to have a full sax section. It's just going to be kind of a more of a Boston pops or a Cincinnati pops sort of treatment of it. I want to keep it as authentic as I can, but I'm only going to have one saxophone, and I'm limited by, orchestral rhythm section players, etc. So I'll modify the music to work in that context. And so it's not as authentic as I would like, but it still is very representative of Duke Ellington and Billy Strayhorn. However, when I'm creating a concert of a new show like I'm writing, like I have a show that I've written for Shermer called Lush Life, and it is actually all Ellington and Strayhorn. And on that one, I went back and I really I copped exactly what they were doing in the band. So I had full sax section, and and the only thing I did on that one that they didn't do, we have an amazing string orchestra, so I added strings to it, and the strings are not just fluff, playing whole notes and I mean, the strings are sometimes playing the saxophone parts because it's so cool when they do that. As a matter of fact, I have an arrangement on this Motown show of Superstition.
Yeah, Stevie
And
Wonder.
it's got that, yeah, and it's got that line at right, and the horns are playing that, the trumpets and saxes. I have the string section going, and they can play it, and they love it. So, and I don't think Stevie imagined strings would be playing that, but I know they can play it, and it's exciting, you know. So I make those kind of choices, you know, when I can. So, you know, it's kind of going back and forth. I don't want to change it too much, but I want to, if Stevie gets to hear it, I want to blow his mind and have him say, wow, I never imagined the string orchestra, the cellos are playing that line, you know? I mean, that's kind of part of the fun of it.
You also mentioned playing outdoors versus indoors. How does that affect your compositions, your approach? Does it at all?
You know, you have to give it up. You're the victim of technology when you're outside, and weather. You know, as a matter of fact, something is as crazy as the wind. I mean, the players have to use paper clip. I mean, laundry clips to clip their music to their stands. They have these fancy clips, and I've been in the middle of a concert and somebody's music is blowing across the stage. You know, I mean, so you're dealing with elements and you're dealing with humidity and temperature. So if the temperature is either too cold, if it's below, I think the rules are something, if it's below 60, might be 68 degrees, or above 90 or maybe 92, the musicians can't play, because it can really affect, it can crack the violins. There's stuff that can happen with outdoor temperatures. So that we haven't even gotten to the music yet, but we're just dealing with that stuff, you know. And then you've got sound issues. Like if you're going to play outside, everything is going to be mic'd, every single thing. So you're never getting what I would call, you know, an acoustic sound. You know, usually on Pops concerts, there are a lot of miking and speakers stuff being used, but you know, they're like, if I do a John Williams concert with, you know, music of E.T., Superman, you know, Harry Potter, all that kind of stuff, we don't use any microphones. We just use the acoustic properties of the shell. You can't do that outside, because outside the sound will travel about 20 feet. That's about it, you know. So you're having to work with the sound system and the temperature and the weather conditions, and you know, it's pretty tricky. On the other hand, it could be a lot of fun. Every summer out in Vail, we do concerts in something that's a little bit like what we have down at the Finger Lakes. So there's a shell, there's a roof over part of the audience, the sides are open, and then there's a lawn where people sit. And there's some acoustic property in there. But, you know, it's fun to have 4,000 people outside going crazy. You know, that's kind of another type of experience. That's good. And there have been some kind of magical moments. I mean, one of the things that jumps out of my head was, I remember when I was working with Chuck Mangione, this jazz artist from Rochester, and we were recording a live album at the Hollywood Bowl. And there were 18,000 people there. And that is quite an incredible experience. And then another experience with Chuck was, there's a theater outside of Denver called Red Rocks. And it's built into the side of a mountain. And the seats are actually, they're stone. Everything is stone. You got to bring your pillows and stuff to sit on, or you're going to be crazy. And it seats 10,000 people. And we did a sunrise concert. So we started playing at 5 o'clock in the morning. We played from 5 to 9 for actually about, maybe it was, did we start at 5? Yeah, I think we started, or maybe we started at 6, because sun came up at 7. So we played 6 to 9 for 10,000 people. They left. We came back and played 7 to 10 the same night for another 10,000 people outside. And that's a big production concert and with sound and everything. But that was an amazing experience. So I mean, playing outside can be cool, but it's also sometimes, maybe you don't get the best sound engineer and the sound is weird and things happen and music's blowing all over the place. It's a challenge. So,
do you have a preference, inside or outside?
No, I just think if people came, we're going to give them our best wherever we are. If we're in a high school gym playing for kids, or if we're in, Hollywood Bowl, or if we're in the Eastman Theater, or if I'm conducting in Monaco, which I have, it's the same. I'll tell you one of my, you want to hear one of my most memorable moments? Because you'll never believe that this is what it is. Okay. We have a high school here in the Rochester inner city, Wilson Magnet High School.
Mm-hmm.
And many years ago, I was doing a series of concerts with the Rochester Philharmonic Orchestra I titled the concerts Overcoming Adversity. So we played an Ellington piece on the concert, and I said, here's the incredible, great American composer, Duke Ellington, and he played for kings and queens and presidents and earls. But you know what? They wouldn't let him use the bathrooms. He couldn't stay in the hotels in the city he was in. He couldn't eat in the restaurants. I mean, he was treated poorly because of racial discrimination, but he overcame it all to be one of America's greatest composers. Let's look at, we had our trumpet player, Doug Prosser, in the band. And when he was in Barcelona playing in his early career, he completely split his lip, thought he'd never play again. But one of the preeminent facial surgeons in the world lived in Barcelona and put him back together. And now he's our principal trumpet player. He played something, And then I talked about Shostakovich, the Soviet composer, who during his day in Russia, if you didn't write what the Communist Party wanted you to write as a member of the Bureau of Soviet Composers, they would just shoot you. That was it. So he wrote this joyous fanfare, and it was an incredible piece, and he kept it in his desk till after Stalin died. So that was kind of the nature of the concert. So we go to Wilson Magnet High School, and it was a young inner city crowd, and then this orchestra on stage with not a lot of diversity in the orchestra. And I'm thinking to myself, man, this is going to be an interesting morning, because we're playing Shostakovich, but we are playing, the music's different. The crowd is different. We're in a high school on Thursday morning at 10 o'clock. This is going to be a ride. I don't know where it's going, but so we start Shostakovich, and the whole opening is this big fanfare. And then the music gets very fast. It's going on. It's exciting. Then in the middle, there's another big fanfare. And then there's an even more exciting ending. So, my back is to the audience. And we start the ending section, and it is building. And I'm hearing this roar behind me. And I'm thinking, oh, my God. A fight, something's going on out there. There's something going on, and I'm starting to get nervous actually. And we're playing a piece, we get to the end. I turn around, and this young audience who had never in their life heard Shostakovich had been giving us a standing ovation for a whole minute, and wow, clapping and screaming and yelling. And that showed me the power of music. It didn't matter who we were, how old, how young, what color. It didn't really matter. We're in a room playing this incredible music, and the audience responded to it. It's something they'd never heard in their life before. So that was so powerful. It just showed me you can be anywhere, playing for any people, and have that kind of impact.